does everyone feel tonight? Doing okay? This is holiday season, I guess, whether it's a combination of different religious and secular holidays, and many of us are busy doing whatever we have to do for that. It's nice that we could take time to stop, you know, to stop running, stop doing, to stop having to do whatever we feel obligated to do, all that stuff. Really just stop and come together and use the Dharma like a mirror to reflect. So every time I start these sessions, part of me feels like I could be doing some harm by talking too much um, and stimulating a lot of thinking in a way that, can lead to our continued chronic thinking. Because not that thinking is bad at all. Thinking and thought is just a tool, and it's an amazing tool, actually. It's an amazing tool, a function of our mind that allows us to do so many amazing things. And all the teachings of the Buddha and all the teachings of the masters generations after the Buddha, they all used words in most cases and recorded these words on paper. They memorized these words and passed them on, and they became the sutras and the shastras, or the treatises, which we use today to understand how to practice. So it's all incredibly useful because if we didn't have words and if people didn't express their insight and thought, we wouldn't be able to grasp anything. If teachers just moved their body or did something, made a sound without using words, without instructing us in the practice, we probably would just think it would be strange and not know what to make of it. But you may have read that many Chan and Zen records have such teachings or such expedient means where the teacher would simply make a movement, a sound, even grab the person by the collar, shout, um, or not say anything. And that was a kind of instruction, or it was useful for the person to then know what to do, to have insight themselves. But in most cases, we need to use words, we need to talk a lot and think to understand the whole path of practice. So in Buddhism, the three approaches to practice of the Chinese is wen si xiu, which is listening, thinking, or reflecting on what we've heard, and then applying it or cultivating it, practicing it. It's all important. But it can be tricky to have a balance of thinking and reflection and application. So, in these sessions, we think a lot, we talk a lot, but it's important to remember that for most of the practice, it's application. It's using the method or using a method and applying ourselves, applying effort in a way that calms the mind. Number one, it's part of one of the two most essential aspects of practice. One is the method helps us calm our mind. And when the mind is more calm and stable, it's able to see things or experience things in a way that brings about insight. So only when our mind is calm and stable can we really make use of the words, the ideas, and apply them so that we see in a very different way, or we experience life in a liberating way that comes through application. So in Buddhism, we talk about 解行并重. or understanding and practice being equally important. However, if we look at the proportion of practice to understanding or this thinking, the practice is much more. So if you find yourselves caught up in thinking a lot about this to the point where it becomes a burden, it's important to remind yourself just to put all those ideas aside and just use the method. Those ideas and those thoughts still work in the background of our mind. It's like we've planted these seeds, they still work in the background. And as we practice, as the mind is calmer and clearer, a thought may just arise in our mind, which helps us to have a breakthrough. And sometimes it could be an impetus from the outside, or it could be a thought that just arises in our mind and allows us to let go of the burden of something that we were attaching to. So it's just, I wanted to remind everyone of the balance of thought or thinking and actual practice and application. And for myself, since we moved up here, the new house and a new property, I've been doing a lot more outdoor work. I don't know if you folks have where you live, a plot of land where you need to do work, or if you have, house chores that need to be done often. I guess all of us have house chores. But this kind of activity, work that's really simple, where we're using our body and where we're in contact with the environment, we're engaging with what we see and feel and hear. This is really an amazing approach to practice that really it goes beyond just sitting in meditation, but doing chores. Whether it's outside now, I love it actually. I've always loved doing chores. Um, I think people thought I was a strange child. And when I became a monk, they also thought it was kind of strange that I was always cleaning, or, that was pretty much my assignment for the first couple of years to clean the monks' quarters. So sweeping these floors that were just covered in dust. Now I can go outside and chop wood, carry wood, and I love it because it doesn't take much thought at all. Here and there, a thought of where should this go, or how should I stack this wood, or how long should I cut this piece? Very small percentage of using thought and then just doing it, doing the work, moving the body, exercising the body, and being present with the environment in the moment, moment to moment. It's a beautiful way to practice, and I find it therapeutic. And I know some of you also do gardening. And some of you, I don't know if anybody here likes chores. Anyone like chores? Doing the dishes, cleaning the toilet? It sound like fun. Even if you think it's not fun, just doing it with a different mindset. Not that, oh, I have to get this over with, but doing chores with the mindset of, I'm training my mind, or I'm cleaning and purifying my mind as I clean and purify the toilet, clean and purify the floor. If we do chores in that way, we can really make it a practice and develop a kind of relaxed body and mind that's also very alert and aware moment to moment because we have to move, because we have to look. So I encourage everyone to not do too much study, too much thinking. And when you find your mind caught up in all these thoughts about Buddhism, do some chores, move the body. And this can also be helpful when we're struggling with particularly strong emotions. Um, if we just got into an argument, or if we have a lot of history or past trauma that it's really hard just to sit with, we can do chores. We can move the body and engage with the environment. It's very therapeutic. And this is part of Chan Zen culture. The monastics did sitting every day for sure, but most of the day actually was working. Morning and evening was sitting time. Unless you were in the Chan Hall and you could sit all day, most people weren't in the Chan Hall, the Zen Hall, all the time. So most people were working. And this is how our methods evolved. Chan methods of silent illumination or Huatou, we can use them in movement, use them in activity. So we can apply them all the time. Whereas more traditional methods, foundational methods of um, early Buddhism, for the most part, you need to be sitting in order to do any of these contemplations. Very complicated samadhi, concentration practices, or very complicated visualizations, or complicated contemplations that involve analysis. That's not possible to do that in movement. So, uh, Chan methods, as well as reciting the Buddha name, can be used all the time. So, that was a bit of a long introduction, but I think it's necessary to remind ourselves the balance of thought, thinking, and application needs to be a good balance, healthy balance. So, last time we talked about interconnectedness and boundaries. And just to review, if you weren't here, or just as a basic summary, Buddhism talks about interconnectedness or interdependence. That's the basic teaching of all Buddhism. And in order to be interconnected well, in order to be interconnected in a way that's harmonious, we need boundaries. And the boundaries in Buddhism were, as we discussed, precepts or ethics. It's the basis of boundaries, making sure we don't do things that hurt others or ourselves. And then we talked about setting boundaries through expressing our feeling, expressing things that may not be included in the precepts, but that we can express how we feel as a way to know, to let people know if we feel like we're being harmed. And if we let them know, we can inform them and prevent ourselves from creating harm. So, to be truly interconnected in a wise and harmonious way, we make use of boundaries. Paradoxically, at the same time, we recognize that our interconnectedness is boundless and we all affect each other very deeply. And with awareness of that, we will naturally not harm others, but be much more careful and caring, considerate to others. So that was last time. For today, we have two topics, but I'd like to combine them into one topic. We'll talk about these two topics. One is perfectionism, and the second topic is about the contemplation of selflessness. Even just the Buddhist concept of selflessness or not self and self-value. Um, so I'd like to actually talk about these two at the same time to address how do we deal with perfectionism if we're suffering from it, and then how do we contemplate selflessness without devaluing ourselves? So just to say more about that, someone brought up a question and they said they've been studying Buddhism and they hear about this practice of contemplating not self. And as they're doing this contemplation, they feel that they start to actually devalue themselves. They think about themselves as, oh, as Buddhism says, we're just five aggregates, right? We're just physical form, sensation, perception, and so on. So it's just like this thing. I'm just this fleshy thing. And he said, I tend to get stuck in devaluing myself, you know? Um, and he asked what to do about that. So I'd like to talk about these new topics together. Anybody relate to perfectionism on some level? Yeah. And this contemplation on selflessness can be one of the most confusing things in all of Buddhism, right? So it's important to talk about it again and again until we get it, till it becomes natural to see its connection to our life. So let's begin with perfectionism. And as usual, let's define it. What is perfectionism? Maybe maybe someone else would like to define it. How could you define perfectionism? And remember, you can't use the word perfect in the definition. To you, what does it mean?
I think
Hi.
for me, I used to teach Latin, so I like to think of what are the roots of words, and this one in English is comes from the Latin word to be thoroughly finished with something. So it's like whatever the product is isn't missing anything, that there's nothing left to do to it, there's nothing left to alter on it, there's nothing left to add. It's got all the things that it needs, and you're not going to do anything else to it.
So from that definition, perfection just means something ultimately complete. Okay. Others, how could we relate that to perfectionism, which that word has a connotation of there being a problem? What is perfectionism?
Uh, the problem with perfectionism is that perfection is a mirage. It's an impossible state because there's always more you can do. You can be more perfect, but there's no end state. So people who are not happy until they're perfect will never be happy.
Okay. So to follow up on that, it sounds like what you're saying is someone who pursues perfection, who pursues this ultimate state of being complete with nothing more to do, is pursuing an impossibility. And because of that, it creates suffering. It creates a lot of trouble. I think that's a good place to start. What do you folks think? Perfectionism is the pursuit of being flawless, of being ultimately complete with nothing more to do, whether this is an external project or outcome, or whether it's our character, right? So we could be perfectionist in wanting to bake a cake, bake the perfect cake, or we could want to have perfect character. And as someone asked in the chat here, what about nirvana? Isn't that a state of perfection? And isn't Buddhism seeking this state of psychological perfection? So let's dig into this, shall we? Piece by piece. Yeah. So quite a few folks that I'm working with now through coaching or therapy talk about really being bothered by seeking perfection, and that whether it is baking a cake, which is a real example that comes to mind, or whether it's having a perfect performance, like a perfect test score, wanting to score without any errors on a test, or whether it's performance in terms of how we are as a person. Um, some of us who practice Buddhism want to be perfect in terms of our character, and we get upset when we experience, troubles. 烦恼, and we experience vexation or troubles. Maybe we get mad at ourselves for getting angry, or we get mad at ourselves for feeling nervous, or we get frustrated with ourselves for being frustrated, or we get frustrated for not using the method perfectly and having distracting thoughts. So perfectionism can pervade our whole life if it's our habit to seek this ideal state, right? We must have an ideal in our mind, and and we're comparing that ideal to our current state, right? And we're saying my current state is not good enough. I'm just not good enough until I reach that ideal state. People often talk about not feeling good enough, right? No matter what, not feeling good enough, whether it's performance, character, anything. And it's usually because there's some ideal or standard of perfection that they're seeking. And as some of you may have experienced earlier in your life, that your parents or teachers told you frequently that you're not good enough. Even when you performed to your best ability, you tried your hardest, the feedback you got was it's not good enough, right? You get a 99. Why didn't you get 100? You get an A. Why didn't you get an A plus or A plus plus? Um, you're second in the class. Why didn't you get first in the class? So all the feedback that we got over and over developed this um, complex of not feeling good enough or not feeling worthy or valuable. And we've stored that perception of ourself, and it plays in the background throughout our life. So whenever we do something without even being conscious of it, we may be criticizing and thinking of ourselves as, just it's still not good enough. We bake a cake. Someone who was telling me that she loves to bake, but whenever she'd bake a cake, unless it was perfectly round, like the dough part, whatever you call that part, the fluffy part that you start with, unless it was perfectly round, she would throw it out and start again. And that would take like another hour or so to bake that part. So it may take two or three times to feel that it was perfectly round. Then she said, even if that was perfectly round, the icing had to be perfect. If the icing wasn't perfect, she'd have to scrape it off and start over. And if you scrape one whole section off, you can't link the icing as well. So she may have to rip off all of the icing and start over. And she said she felt, very nervous about presenting the cake to someone. If it was for herself, she would feel okay, but if she was giving the cake to someone, she felt very nervous and agitated throughout the whole process. And that happened, again and again, not only with making cakes, but with her work and with her personal life. She would also be afraid to communicate because she didn't want to fail in the relationship. She felt that if she said the wrong thing or if she told something to someone that was that revealed her imperfection, she was afraid that that person would leave, thinking she was really not good enough. So because of that perfectionism, it prevented her from really speaking what was on her mind. So the relationship became blocked. The communication was blocked because of the fear to verbalize, the fear to say what's on her mind. So her partner didn't know what to do. He tried, but she didn't want to open up. And he reacted to that and tried harder to open her up, like to break her open and see what was inside, and that just made things worse. He became overly proactive in trying to figure out what's going on, what's with you. She became more and more defensive. So this perfectionism can pervade our whole life. And what can we do about it? From the perspective of Buddhism, what does Buddhism say about dealing with perfectionism? And this is very interesting because I haven't seen that word, perfectionism, show up in Buddhist sutras. It's a more modern term. Um, but Buddhism points out that it's an upside down view to think that things can be perfect, things can be pure. And um, especially the body. The body is something that in Buddhism, there's a contemplation on the body, a contemplation of impurity. Chinese is 不净观. Have you heard of that? Which is coming from the methods of stilling the mind. So, for example, the contemplations of impurity on in stilling the mind, one of them is to imagine or to visualize the body decaying, to visualize a corpse. In times in ancient India, people would actually sit in front of corpses and actually contemplate an actual corpse. Did you know that? There were these fields that people would put corpses, and that was the way you would deal with the body, especially if you didn't have money for a funeral. So you could sit in front of it and contemplate it decomposing. And you would contemplate how this is impurity. The body is not as pretty, as clean, or as beautiful as we imagine it. So we would use an antidote to contemplate its impurity. If you didn't have access to a corpse, you can also just contemplate your own body and how it has all these imperfect qualities, how it doesn't always feel good, especially if we feel tired or sick, and all the different tissues and organs and aspects of the body that we don't usually see, but that we sometimes see. We didn't shower for a few days, our body doesn't feel so pure. Probably feels itchy, it smells. It's probably not nearly as attractive as it is when we're freshly showered, when we're all done up, and when we've added scents and odors to the body or perfumes to the body to cover all that stuff up. So in early Buddhism, the contemplation of impurity was one way to reflect on the imperfection of the body. And so that we don't attach to it and we don't try to seek having a perfect body, or that we don't seek someone else's body or imagine it as perfect. And this contemplation can help deal with sexual cravings, but it can also help deal with aversion to illness and death. And this kind of contemplation can be extended to material things that we attach to. So whether we attach to making the perfect cake, or whether we attach to a perfect score on something, we can reflect on the natural imperfection of those things. Can you really make a perfectly, perfectly, perfectly round cake? And if so, how do you measure that? You know, do you just use your eye and say, it looks pretty good? Maybe somebody else would use a laser or something or some sort of tool to measure it and say, well, it's not exactly a round cake. But to reflect on the imperfect nature of things was a way to release us from the attachment to seeking some kind of perfection, right? Another contemplation is um, a contemplation of conditions or conditioned arising. in a way that looks at the nature of anything being dependent on multiple causes and conditions. So, if we have some sort of goal in mind, like a perfect score on a test, or even the perfect cake, anything, think of your own um, something that bothers you, that you want to be perfect, that you're seeking perfection with. The outcome depends not just on you. The outcome to any endeavor is not just based on ourself. Although sometimes we think that, we may think that, well, this test score is, of course, it depends on myself. I'm the one taking the test, right? You're not taking the test for me. But actually, what dependent origination or dependent arising reminds us is that every outcome depends not only on this person, our body and mind engaging in the activity, but it depends on all these other conditions that we can't control. We can't control the weather of that day we go take the test. If it snows, maybe we show up late. We don't have that much time to complete the test. We studied with someone, so we maybe had a tutor or a mentor or a study partner, and maybe that person wasn't the best study partner, so it wasn't as helpful as it could have been. The information that we were given to study with maybe wasn't the greatest, or that because we had to deal with something else in our life, a friend or a family member needed us, so we didn't have that much time to study as we wished we could have had. Maybe we didn't sleep well. Maybe we haven't been sleeping well for the whole period that we're studying because we're spending 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day studying, and then we're so burnt out we don't sleep well. And the day we take the test, our mind is foggy. Some of these things depend on us, our behavior, but some of these factors really depend on things that are beyond our control. So dependent origination reminds us that so many things are out of our control. If we expect to be able to control everything and get a perfect outcome, we're just in for trouble because that's a really upside down way of looking at things. So that's another contemplation to help undo the pressure that we give ourselves to be perfect, to perform perfectly. We can apply all of the main concepts of the Dharma, impermanence, conditioned arising, to look at the fact that perfection is actually not achievable. Even if we perform at our best, as Victor just said, it could always be better, right? So perfection is this impossible standard that if we look at conditions and we accept the conditions, that whether it's our subjective conditions, our health, our energy level, our ability, which is always changing and depending on things, or external conditions outside of our control or ability to guide, these things are also affecting the outcome. And all of that is just imperfect. This is foundational Buddhism or early Buddhism's antidote to perfection. Um, which is also an antidote to the idea of self and ultimate control. So the idea of self, what does self include? Self includes a control over everything. So if there really was a self, if this body mind was self, we could just keep it from getting sick, right? If it was really under our control, we could just stop ourselves from getting sick. If we were injured, we could just heal it magically. But that's obviously not the case. So part of the understanding of not self is that things are ultimately out of our control. But the person who asked about this question of not valuing things then, a question could arise that if things aren't perfect, if we contemplate things and we reflect on things being impermanent, being not perfect, impure, looking at ourselves as just these five aggregates. We have this body that's impure. It's like this imperfect form, physical form. In Chinese Buddhism, the term 臭皮囊, like a foul bag of skin. Is that the right word? Nang is bag of skin. 臭皮囊. Uh, in some Buddhist circles, they refer to the body in that way as a means to not be too attached to it. And feelings are also imperfect because, yeah, we have good feelings, but they pass so quickly. And we have unpleasant feelings. We can't control these feelings. So seeking feelings and seeking a perfect state where we feel good all the time is also a problem. And our thoughts, too. It's like our thoughts seem totally out of control. When we don't want to think of something, we end up thinking of something. When we want to think of something, we can't remember something. So even our mind and our thinking is imperfect. So by contemplating the imperfection of things, sometimes a person can start to devalue themselves and think that, the body, this person is kind of worthless. If it's all imperfect, if it's all impure, why don't we just die and get it over with? Why don't we just get rid of it? And maybe we'll then be in nirvana, or hopefully. And some people who do the contemplation on impermanence in particular, they can start to have a feeling of disgust towards their body. They could start to think of their body as being gross, ugly. And whenever somebody says something, even like, hey, you look great tonight, they may say, ah, 臭皮囊. It's just a foul smelling bag of skin. And people are like, what? That was a compliment. And some people who've done this kind of contemplation can overdo it and actually get stuck in impurity, get stuck in a negative thinking about the body or about everything in the world as just being impermanent, impure. It's just everything is worthless because it's all going to change anyway. So the person who asked that question about devaluing themselves, this can happen if when doing this contemplation, the antidote to being attached to the body or attached to a perfect outcome, we could get stuck in imperfection. We could get stuck in this thought of impurity. And that can be a problem because that would lead to a very pessimistic and dark view of everything, right? It's like, what's the worth in anything if it's all just this foul smelling, impermanent, uncontrollable stuff? So there's an antidote to that. Mahayana Buddhism is, in one way, an antidote to the contemplations or view of early Buddhism of impurity. and even an antidote to the views of impermanence and not self. And there's a saying that if you get stuck in the view of things being permanent, that's pretty bad, right? Because that leads to a lot of pain and suffering. If you get stuck in the view of impermanence, then you're really stuck. Then you're potentially helpless. It's really hard to get someone unstuck from the view of impermanence and not self, impurity, things being dissatisfying when it becomes a chronic thought. When that becomes an attachment, it's a problem. So in Mahayana Buddhism, the antidote to that is purity. Go back to purity. There's a teaching in the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, or Yuanjue Jing. It can be translated as the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, or sometimes it's translated as the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment. Has anyone read that? There's an excellent commentary by Master Shengyan Shifu. Uh, it's in English originally, and it was also translated to Chinese. The Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment had a lot of influence, especially on the Chan school. It had a lot of influence on the Chan school, Huayan Buddhism, and its view of perfection is different than the first perfection we talked about. So the first kind of perfection we talked about is seeking an ideal and flawless thing, whether it's our body, our character, or an object, an outcome. That kind of perfection is in opposition to imperfection. It's relative perfection. The perfection of the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment is, we could say, ultimate perfection or non-relative perfection, non-dual perfection. And what does it say? Well, it just says that everything is actually perfect and pure, meaning that when we experience our mind as pure, as long as our mind is experienced as pure, meaning pure or free from craving, free from anger, and free from all kinds of views and opinions, rigid views and opinions. That's a pure mind, right? It's a mind without suffering, a mind without attachment. It doesn't mean it's a clean and pure mind as opposed to a dirty mind. It actually just points out that the mind is always pure, even if we experience problems, even if we experience suffering and attachment. In actuality, the mind can't be ultimately damaged or soiled. So maybe sometimes we do think we're permanently damaged. We may think that we have these character flaws or these problems that just seem like permanent fixtures. I'm always going to be an angry person. I'm always going to be an impatient person. I'm always going to be an anxious person. Whatever the obstacle that we're facing is, sometimes we can take it to feel like a permanent fixture and a permanent obstacle, like an actual feature of our mind. What the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment points out is that all of these obstacles are actually just transient phenomena, really just a product of passing thoughts, a product of being unclear of passing thoughts. passing thoughts, we could look at impurities of the mind in the same way that dirt and water, like muddy water, we could look at the mud as impurities. But does the mud actually make the water dirty? And just think about this for a second. If you have muddy, mucky water, does the mud actually damage the water and make the water itself impure? If it did, the water would always be, damaged. It would be irreparable. But what we know is that if the water is mucky because of whatever reason, um, us stirring up the muck on the bottom, if we just stop stirring, the mud, what does the mud do? The mud settles eventually, right? And you're left with clear water. It's an analogy. So if you have a scientific mind, you may think, well, some chemicals, some things when you put in the water may alter the chemistry of the water so the molecules are, stripped away from the H2O but don't take it that far. When muck is in water, when dirt and sediment is in water, it doesn't actually damage the water. The water is always pure. The water is always clear. It's just that the impurities are all floating and they're stirred up. The Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment looks at the mind and mental phenomenon in the same way. That once all of our obstructions, whether it's anger or craving or whatever, once it settles, once we don't attach to it as ourself, once we don't attach to those passing thoughts as permanent features, they actually settle. I could say they actually vanish, or they're no longer obstacles. And what's left is the experience of the mind as pure. This is actually referring to the enlightened mind. This is an ideal of Buddhism that the mind by nature is pure and luminous. It's just that because of our constant attachment, our constant chronic thinking that I talked about in the beginning, because of our constant obsessions and chronic thinking, all of these problematic patterns that we have feel perpetual. But the moment, even if it's one moment that we have awareness of these passing thoughts as they are, they stop to be obstacles. And what we experience is the mind as pure as it always was, pure and perfect, so to speak. So the question of, is nirvana a perfectionism? We could say seeking nirvana is perfectionism. But from the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, nirvana is also just a passing thought. The word nirvana, it's really just a word. It's just a passing thought. From this sutra's perspective, the nature of our mind is nirvana, or is free. It is already perfect. We don't need to become perfect. So perfectionism is seeking perfection, trying to become perfect. The sutra points out that our nature is perfect already. We don't need to become perfect. Does that make sense? It's reminding us we all have this potential to realize this perfect potential, this ability to be free. It's always there. And it goes on to say that if we can experience the mind as pure, the mind as perfect, actually we see everything as perfect, or we see everything as pure again. But this purity is not a relative purity. We just see things as they are. and there's no problem with them. They don't disturb the mind. So in that sutra, it says that when the mind is experienced as pure, everything is experienced as pure. The body, the environment, everything is experienced as fine. We could use that word. Everything is fine as it is, because we're no longer judging it as, oh, this is perfect and that's imperfect. This is desirable, that's not desirable. This person's good, this person's bad. I am good or I am impure or bad. All of those judgments, when those are gone, everything is just fine. And there's a great peace in experiencing ourselves in the world in that way, a non-judgmental. The traditional term is non-discriminating, 无分别. When we experience ourselves in the world without discrimination, all these ideas of perfect, imperfect, pure, impure, self, other, all those ideas that create so much seeking and aversion. When those are gone, that's purity. Right? So the word purity in the sutra, or perfection, is this not relative purity or perfection. It's an ultimate purity or perfection, or absolute purity or perfection. When the mind is free from discrimination, that's what purity is referring to. So if we were to uh, have an attitude like that, um, we would be okay with a cake that's perfectly round or a cake that's a little messed up. It's perfect as it is, right? To go back to a concrete example, if we're making a cake, it's a little messed up. We even accidentally cut a chunk out of it. It's okay. It's perfect as it is. Put a little icing, patch up the chunk that got ripped out, make it look nice. We put our heart into it. It's perfect. It's a perfect cake as it is. If we do it with love, if we do it as a gift, I'm sure the person will be grateful for it. We don't have to worry. If it's a test performance and we don't get the so-called perfect score, whatever score we get is perfect. That's the perfect score. Whatever score we get, however we perform, that's the way it turned out. There's so many reasons for it. It's fine. We did our best. So it's perfect. Score is perfect, no matter what the number. And if it's our relationship, we don't have to be afraid to verbalize and express ourselves. We don't have to be afraid to ruin the relationship or show our imperfection in some way. Because no matter what our character flaws are, we're perfect. We're fine as we are. We're lovable as we are. This view of absolute perfection of the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment can really help us to have this unconditional value to ourselves, to this body and mind, and um, to other people. Unconditional love, or unconditional compassion, if you prefer that word, comes when we can just see and accept things as they are without judgments. It's different than accepting things as they are, like, oh yeah, I just accept that I'm just a lousy person. Or I accept that I'm always going to be anxious. I'm always going to be angry. Or I accept that my partner's just a jerk. It's just the way they are. There's some peace when people can, accept something with judging it at the same time. There's some peace with that, but it's actually a tainted view compared to just being aware. without discrimination. Aware of ourselves and how we feel in the moment and whatever thoughts are coming into our mind and whatever our partner is going through, and verbalizing whatever it is that we feel and think in a skillful way. That's seeing things as absolutely perfect. We're fine. We're fine even now in the moment that we suffer. Because our nature is perfect. We just don't see it yet. So the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment is the view of enlightenment. It can be a little bit confusing when we first hear it, and it may be hard to have confidence in that. But it can be a good reminder just to let go of judging ourselves, to let go of seeking perfection, which is an impossibility, seeking a relative perfection. I got to do better. This has got to be all in place. It has to be like this and that. It can help us to let go of impurity if we start to look at things as, oh, everything is just messed up anyway. We just let go of all of these judgments, all of these discriminations, and experience in the present moment things as they are, beyond descriptions, beyond relative purity, impurity. And there's a unconditional love there, unconditional compassion. So if we find ourselves getting stuck in these different contemplations or reflections on impermanence, not self, impurity, this reminder from the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment is very powerful. It's a reminder that at at our heart, we're already perfect. The moment we stop our chronic thinking, the moment we let go of attachment to these dust-like or dirt-like thoughts that float here and there, we experience ourselves as pure and free and at ease. That can happen at any moment, even for a moment. So, in that sense, seeking nirvana or nirvana itself is not perfectionism, right? Seeking it can be a kind of perfectionism, but having confidence in it as our nature, that's just brings freedom and brings deeper confidence in the path. And just to wrap up before we have time for questions and discussion, how do we practice this in terms of a method? Well, the methods of silent illumination or Huatou are these methods based on confidence in our nature being pure. Basically, with silent illumination, we're not doing anything. We're not intentionally trying to get rid of wandering thoughts or try to get rid of our emotional feelings and states. With silent illumination, we just sit or walk or do what we're doing without resisting anything, without resisting any of our troubles, without seeking enlightenment or nirvana. We let go of all of that and we're just doing what we need to do. Or in terms of sitting, we just sit. We let all of those thoughts settle, pass, come and go. And either gradually or suddenly, we experience our mind as being clearer. We're more and more aware of our state and less bothered by it. More and more aware of our state is illumination. Less and less bothered by it is silence. We don't need to do anything to be silently illuminating. It's our nature. So by letting go of trying, letting go of trying to do something, we allow the nature of our mind to function. Huato is a little bit different because there is something to do, but that something to do is, in a way, asking ourselves, if my nature is already pure, why don't I know it? What is it? If I already have it, if it's already here, then what is it? Different phrases in this method of huato or critical phrase. One phrase that we could use is, what is my original face? This original face just refers to our perfect, pure nature. What is this perfect, pure nature? If it's already here, if it's already present, what is that? We ask that phrase to generate this questioning. That questioning helps us to let go of everything else, to let go of seeking for it, or to let go of pushing away our problems. We just remind ourselves, my mind is already pure, but where is it? What is it? It helps us gradually let go of all these other problems and troubles by just reminding ourselves that we have one most important unresolved problem. That's we don't realize our mind is pure. So these two methods are based on this principle of our inherent purity, or the fact that we're really perfect. We're just using this perfect mind to create trouble. Without realizing it, we're using a perfect mind to create problems. Once we stop, we experience things as being just fine, and we feel just fine. So these are the methods of Zen, Chan, that embody or that are based on this kind of principle. So to summarize, how do we deal with perfectionism? We could remind ourselves that the object that we want to make perfect, it's impossible to have a perfect object or a perfect thing inside or outside. But if we get stuck in that idea and we think that everything is worthless anyway, if it's all imperfect and changeable, we remind ourselves that it's ultimately perfect. It's fine as it is, as it changes. And we can talk about in the future that other sutras use different words to have a more positive or affirming view of things, things being wonderful, things being miraculous, right? They're miraculous in their impermanent and empty nature, and that a human is a miracle. You know, we're a miracle, even though we suffer a lot. We're a miracle. We just don't realize it. We could do miraculous things by being kind and by being wise. And to recognize that brings a very positive outlook, a very uh, life affirming outlook on things. So, what do you folks think? Any reflections or questions? Is it more confusing now that I've done all this talking? Yes. Yeah, it's the problem of talking and thinking. Too many words.
It's just perfect.
Perfect answer. For those of you struggling with perfectionism, do you feel perfect now? Those of you struggling with self-hate, do you feel fine now? Grace?
Um, I'm thinking of a phrase from Heart Sutra, 颠倒梦想. It's like in English, inverted delusion. Feel like perfectionism is also 颠倒梦想.
Yeah, yeah. That phrase 颠倒梦想 comes from the four inverted views. One view is that things can be perfect. The body can be perfect and pure compared to impurity. So the Heart Sutra and those prajna teachings, prajna, I think that's how it's pronounced. Those teachings actually take the view of not talking about purity, absolute purity, because that can be confusing. They just say it's neither pure nor impure. It's just immediately helping us to let go of concepts. You know, is the cake perfect or imperfect? The Heart Sutra would just say it's neither. Just eat the cake. Just eat it or just give it. Don't worry about it being perfect or imperfect, right? It's more direct. Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment would just say give the cake with a pure mind. Don't give the cake and wonder, will they like it? Will they think it's good? Maybe I shouldn't give it. Just give the cake with a pure mind. Just a little bit different of an emphasis. So there's sometimes a problem of talking about all these views of Buddhism at once because it's not necessary for everyone at every point in time. Some people could just benefit from hearing that things aren't perfect. And they're just like, oh, okay. So I won't try so hard, or I won't kill myself trying too hard. I won't be hard on myself thinking it's not good enough. They just work hard. But some folks need to hear that they're perfect already. Affirming, having this unconditional affirmation to help them get unstuck. So whatever one works for you is fine. Other thoughts, reflections, questions?
Hi, David.
Yeah, Inge?
So, we're talking about perfectionisms, but how about safe and unsafe? You feeling safe and feeling unsafe is the same concept?
Could you give an example?
Like I feel safe when I drive by myself, and I feel unsafe when my husband's driving. So I feel like maybe, well, from his perspective, he's driving safely. But from my perspective, it's just like too risky.
Yeah, so how could we deal with that situation?
Mm,
The feeling troubled if you have to ride in the car with him, because I assume that you can't always drive, can you? Or always drive by yourself.
50-50%.
Hmm. Yeah. So how could we use either some of the concepts or methods we talked about tonight to deal with that sense of not feeling safe or safe? Maybe we could remind ourselves that no one's driving is perfect and we can't ever be perfectly safe. even if someone's a professional driver, we can never be perfectly safe. And to go a step further, no matter what happens, everything is perfect. Everything's perfectly in its place. Sometimes we can't avoid accidents or we can't avoid these problems, but as long as we don't judge the person for making that mistake and constantly hold on to that. It's because you were driving this way that this happened. I should have been driving. If I was driving, this would have never happened. Right? That judgmental or that discriminating mind perpetuates our suffering. So if we can practice just letting go of those judgments and the situation is just what it is, that would be the letting go of this, the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment talks about. Letting go and seeing things with a pure mind. We would feel safe. We'd feel okay because that's just the way it is. We'd feel at ease because we're not judging someone or judging ourselves. If we were the one who got into the accident, right? We would have this unconditional understanding towards ourself or someone else. And we would feel this absolute safeness or absolute security. These are things that we can think about, reflect on, and then just practice. If anything seemed confusing, it's fine. It's fine if we're confused. For the things that we're confused about, or the things that don't seem clear or even contradictory, the moment that we practice and use the method, we just let go of that. When it's time to think and reflect again, then we think and reflect again. And have that balance that I mentioned in the beginning. The balance of thinking and reflecting versus just applying the method. Just living our lives, doing our chores, being with people with a pure and clear mind. Whether we understand everything or not, we feel so much more ease and peace. And it's much easier to be kind and loving, especially during these holiday seasons where we have to be with a lot of people, maybe a lot of social engagements and things like that, right? To approach it with a pure mind, to just be with ourselves and be with others. Have a great night. See you next time. Enjoy the holidays.